On the 6th of September 1982, a small village located in southeast Alaska named Craig was horrified and saddened to learn about the tragic murder of 8 people on board the Investor, a small 58-foot boat. 4 of the individuals were the Coulthrust family: skipper Mark Coulthrust, his pregnant wife Irene, and their 2 kids, 5-year-old Kimberly and 4-year-old John. To this day, this case still remains one of the most merciless and sinful acts of murder in the history of America. But what makes this even more indigestible is the fact that the case still remains largely unsolved, with the murderer possibly still walking around amongst the public. On September 5, 1982, a 58-foot-long ship known as the Investor docked near the port of Craig, Alaska. It was believed that the Coulthrusts were a decent and well-off family, as they were the owners of the Investor, and Mark Coulthrust was skilled enough to captain it on his own. As Mark revealed, he had recently bought the ship for about $750,000, which was no small sum of money, then or even now. Mark was considered a commercially successful fisherman by the time he was 20, which is why he was able to buy this state-of-the-art ship before he was even 30. Mark also said that he had been in the line of business since he was 16 years old and had built himself a reputation for being a hard-working young man. The other 4 individuals to join Mark on this voyage were his deckhands, and all of them had been handpicked by Mark to join him on his ship, indicating that he knew them for quite some time and had trusted them enough to let them on board with his family. These men included Dean Moon, a 19-year-old football player from Blaine High School, Michael Stewart, Mark's cousin, who was also 19, Chris Heyman, the youngest among the 4, and was just a couple of days away from hitting his 18th birthday, and finally Jerome Keown, who was also 19. Mark was specific with his choice and chose either athletes or his relatives who were young and healthy and were good enough to handle a ship of that size. When the Investor arrived on the dock, it was said to carry around 80,000 pounds of salmon fish, which Mark's crew had hauled within the week. Mark also mentioned that he and his crew were keen to trade the fish with goods rather than cash, and he was not very fond of doing business with cash-only industries. September 5th was Mark's birthday, and the Coulthrust family was celebrating with dinner at Ruth Ann's restaurant that evening. The other customers that night say that the family was lingering around the restaurant till about 9:30 p.m., after which they paid their bills and went back to their ship to rest for the night. Aside from the Investor, a couple of other ships were also docked at Craig's port, one of which was the ship the Decade, which was positioned the nearest to the Investor. As mentioned by witnesses, the crew of the Decade were having a major feast on their ship that might have been one of the reasons why no one saw the killer make his way inside the Investor. The last time anyone ever saw the Coulthrust family was when they were boarding their ship after finishing their meal. On a fine September morning, the bustling port of Craig had gone quiet as people started noticing that there was something wrong with the Investor, as it had been over 12 hours since it was docked and there was no signs of movement or noise coming from inside of it. At around 6:30 in the morning, one of the crewmen of the Decade started to realize that the Investor had been slowly drifting away from the port and was not properly docked at all. He went on to check the cause of this, only to see that the Investor was moving along with the current. The crewmen reported that 2 lines holding the Investor were missing, and this raised suspicion as those lines were expensive and were to be reused time and time again, so a proper ship captain would never dispose of them. The crewman also said that he saw someone inside the pilot house and waved at that person because he thought it was Mark, and the height and build of the man inside the pilot house resembled that of Mark's. The crewman also said that the man in the pilot house waved back at him, which cleared any doubts that he had. After realizing that the engine of the Investor had malfunctioned, some crew members of the Decade came to know that the man waving from the Investor was not a crewman of Mark's group, as it was odd for a deckhand to pull the ship away from the dock without the engine running. Now, at about 7 a.m., Clyde Curry, the captain of the Decade, arrived and said that he remembered someone exiting the Investor the same time it was pulling away from the dock and slowly drifting away. He described this person to be of blonde hair, a larger build, and of average height, and was wearing a black and red jacket. At about 8 in the morning, the Investor was all but forgotten by the residents of Craig. It had drifted away and was standing still near the Fish Egg Island, which was about a mile away from Craig, and still no one had noticed the ship drifting farther and farther away. Until the 7th of September, the island of Craig had been covered in a fog, and once the fog lifted, every ship that docked near the port was getting ready to sail out, planning to make as much as they can of this salmon season that was about to end. Naturally, the Decade and the locals knew of the Investor, and they expected them to join in this departure, but they were surprised to see that the Investor was still in the Fish Egg Island and had not moved an inch. It wasn't until 4 in the afternoon when the audience of Craig started seeing smoke coming from the Investor that still lay anchored near the Fish Egg Island. The one who discovered the smoke and asked for help was a crew member of the ship named Casino, and by the time the crew of the casino reached the investor, they described it as a flaming wreck. Just as the fire was about to die, the ones who were waiting outside boarded the ship to see if anyone survived the accident, but all they could find was the body of 4 individuals who were perished by the fire, all scorched beyond recognition. By the time investigators arrived at the scene to conduct a proper examination, the fire had started to rage again, which caused some delay in the scene scoping and the retrieval of the 4 bodies. Among the 4 bodies, the autopsy revealed that 2 of the men were Mark and Irene Coulthrust, but that was not the only big find. The authorities reported something that would steer the ship of this tragedy to darker seas. The bodies of Mark and Irene Coulthrust showed signs of struggle and injury, which the examiners believed were caused before their bodies were burnt. The most obvious factor that suggested this was a murder was the gunshot wound found in both of the bodies. Now, there is a theory suggested by the investigators and examiners themselves, which is widely accepted to be the most likely theory. They believe that the murder took place before the investor had left the port of Craig, and after the people boarding the ship were killed, the killers set the ship on fire to make it seem like an accident, or at least to stall the authorities until they got away. Whoever the killer was would surely know that it would not take long for the forensics to determine that this was a murder, not an accident. Further reports supported the claim that this was arson's work, as investigators said that a ship costing around $800,000 is built to not burn, not unless it was set ablaze intentionally and with a proper plan. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that the culprits had initially tried to scuttle the ship and let it sink with the dead bodies aboard. But after seeing that the ship was still floating in the morning, they went back inside and piloted the ship away from the Craig docks, where the residents would quickly realize that something was wrong, and brought the ship to the Fish Egg Island, where they could set it ablaze without anyone noticing. The man that the crew member of the Decade saw the other day piloting the ship and waving back at him was without a doubt the same man involved in the murder of the Coulthrusts and was there to pilot the ship away from the Craig. And all of this happened without the people of Craig noticing at all, and the ones who did notice something all assumed that nothing was wrong. After all, how could something like this happen in their town? After the flames had completely died and the ship was not dangerous anymore, investigators did an in-depth search, turning the whole place upside down. And in that attempt, they discovered additional bones and some body parts of 3 separate bodies, which was believed to be that of the deckhands that accompanied Mark in the voyage. What's even more disturbing is the fact that the body of young John was never found, and experts say that his body was placed at the very center of the fire and was burned to literal ash, leaving nothing behind. Questions still arise asking if there was a reason for John's death to be the way it was. Until November of 1982, the investigators would keep coming back to the Craig dock and scope the place now and then to see if they could find anything of use. During this time, they would also interview many individuals to see if they saw anything that could give them a fresh lead. But all of the efforts gave them nothing new, marking the beginning of another case gone cold. During this time, the murder case was a hot topic, with most news channels and newspapers covering it and the media and public demanding answers. Amidst this, the voice of the family of the victims was lost, even though they were the ones in need of solace and answers the most. Regardless of how long it has been since the tragedy occurred, the fact remains that the killer was never found, and we never got to know why they did what they did. This is the end of the case, at least for now. Leave us a comment down below telling us your thoughts about this case and any other video topics you'd like us to cover.